father's father moved to Peckinpah Mountain, which is above Fresno, and they had a lumber mill. And after he was successful with the lumber business, he went to San Francisco, and he had met his to-be wife, Isabel Toner, and courted her. She was much younger, red-haired, Irish, and he married her, took her up to Peckinpah Mountain. It was God-forsaken up there. There were just lumbermen, and there was no civilization. And she made a go of it, and I admire her for that. My mother's family was not affluent. My grandfather, Denver Church, was an Adventist preacher. He studied to be a doctor. Something happened to his eyes, and my grandmother read the text to him. And then she read the law to him, and he became an attorney. My grandfather was in the House of Representatives, and this had to have been in the 20s, perhaps before. My mother and father got married, and my father, as a young man, younger, before he married, used to have a sign on his door, as he told me, saying, David E. Peckinpah, attorney at law. And then my mother married him, and he was just a cowboy and didn't eat with the proper fork or didn't do the proper things as my mother thought perhaps he should. My oldest brother was born, Denver, and my grandfather was then in Congress. And my father went back, and my mother went back with Denny, and my father studied the law, and my mother kept house for my grandfather, Denver Church. Sam was named after my father and my grandfather. He was Samuel from my grandfather on my mother's side, and David, my father's name. There is a story in the family of my grandfather teasing Sam when Sam was about 2 years old, and the ranch house, Dunlap's, was being built. And I don't know what my grandfather had done, but Sam picked up a pitchfork and chased my grandfather around and around the house. And so he had a temper early on. Sam was 6 years older than I. Sam and I played together more often than Sam did with Denny, because Denny was off with his friends, Denny being 8 years older than Sam. And Sam was kind of a tag-along. And I think they might have been not cruel, but mean to Sam, and it was hard for Sam, being a little guy, to be a rough, tough little guy, which he tried to do and didn't succeed all the time. When I was 7, we moved out to the country, Cedar in Dakota, and it was way out in the country. It's now part of town. We had horses, and I had a horse named Snickle Fritz, and Sam and I used to ride it, and I would be in front and he would be in back. And we were bareback, and we could kick the horse a certain way, and we would fall off. Unfortunately, Sam did fall off and went face down, and then his legs came up, and he did something to his back. He was in pain, and he had to go to San Francisco, and he wore a brace, and it was a horrible brace. If you see later pictures of him, photographs, it's hard for him to stand up straight. He hunched, and it was because of this fall from my horse. Sam went riding with my grandmother, and they found there was a rattlesnake by the side of the road, and D. Sammy, as we called him, jumped off the horse and said, Mudgy, I'll get the snake. And she says, I've got it. And she went over, a little tiny woman, and took the end of her quirt and killed the rattlesnake. Sam said she got so close to the snake, didn't bother her at all. The other story was that her pinto horse threw his head back, and she said, I'll take care of it, D. Sammy, and she whacked him on the head, and the horse never did it again. She was very gentle, but there was some things, no nonsense. We were taught not to show our feelings, and riding horses, if we fell off, we got back on, because that's what you did. And I think that Sam was not given leeway to cry or to be hurt. You just got back on. The responsibilities of being a man in the Peckinpah family, the older men took it for granted. Sam had a very soft, sweet side to him, a very tender side, which I never saw in Denny and rarely saw in my father. And trying to live up to being a tough guy, it was very difficult for Sam. And I think that if he had been left on his own, he would have been more creative as a child. Sam would read voraciously when he was young, and indeed would not answer when my mother called him because he was reading and he knew that she wanted him to chop wood or do something. And he was a voracious reader. We had a balcony that was above the front door, and Sam used to fill balloons with water, and I was dumb enough. He'd say, "Here, catch," and I'd run downstairs, and I'd hold my arms out and catch and get sopping wet. But I do remember that. When I was growing up in the summertime, the boys were many times up with my grandmother and grandfather at the ranch. I would visit and loved it up there, and I never felt, I was with my grandmother in the kitchen, and I was free to roam and go wherever I wanted to. When we were growing up up at Bass Lake, we had a wood-burning stove, and my mother cooked dinner on the stove. And then Sam and I would trade off cleaning up the dishes. We didn't go out very much. And we used to play a game called Slave. And I lost most of the time. And so I did the dishes most of the time, and Sam got out of it. Back of the cabin was a canyon, and it was rock. And the Indians had dug through making acorns, grinding acorns, had made deep holes. And the rocks was slick, and we used to slide down. It was moss covered, and we used to slide down, spend hours playing up there. And then we go to the Bass Lake and swim. And we hunted for flint, and if we were lucky, we'd find an arrowhead, and that was very, very special. And we had cigar boxes that we kept our flint in. Sam and I built a raft up at Bass Lake, and my father was instrumental in helping him cut down the sapling pines, and we strapped it all together with rope and took it down to the water's edge, and Sam made a flag of skull and crossbones, and we called it the Black Maria. Why I can ever remember that name, I'll never know. And we had a maid with us, and Sam and I were getting the raft. I was about 7, and we were getting the raft in the water, and this drunk came toward us and saying, "Hi, little boys and girls." And Sam said, "Run!" And we ran as fast as we could, and we pushed off, and the poor fellow couldn't get near us. But we sailed the Black Maria on Bass Lake and had a good summer. In the Peckinpah family, as in the Church family, early on in the 1800s, they hunted for food. My grandfather had 1 or 2 bullets, and if he didn't hit the deer, they didn't eat. And it was always the rule in the family that you never killed for sport. And there's a story that Sam caught 15 or 16 trout. And my grandfather said, "You like trout." And Sam ate trout for breakfast, Sam ate trout for lunch, and Sam ate trout for dinner. You do not kill for pleasure, you kill because it's food. And it was a rule. I think Sam was just a loose cannon. He would make terrible sounds in the night out in the yard. I knew it was Sam, and it was fine with me. It didn't bother my mother, but Sam was not conventional. He wasn't going to adhere to a certain rule. And rather than seeing that in him, I think my parents, and my father especially, thought military school would make him straighten out. Sam loved the mountains. He loved my grandfather's ranch, and he did spend summers there. They had a cabin away from the main house, and it was called the Ruggedy Bog Cabin. And it had an old iron stove in the middle, and Sam would stay there with Denny, and Denny with friends. And it was kind of bachelor quarters. And Sam loved it there, and so did Denny and friends. I heard stories, but I don't know how true that they had parties. And I don't know about women. I doubt that because they were very young. But it was a man's place. He chose to go into the Marines because it was the toughest branch, supposedly, of the service. And I think he wanted the service to be as hard on him as possible. He went to officers training school. He had a thyroid condition, and he would fall asleep. He came home, and our family doctor said thyroid, and he was on thyroid medication for the rest of his life. When Sam got out of the Marines, he came home for a short while, and at that time he met Marie, his first wife, and they lived in a cabin on our property, and then they left and went down to USC. Sam went in the artistic direction, and I don't think my father or Denny was upset about it. They would like to have had him there with them, but it was all right for Sam to follow what he wanted to do, to go into the theater and movies. My mother, I feel, treated Sam differently because, one, it was a very difficult birth. Two, my grandparents took care of Denny as a young person, so Sam was more with my mother. Sam was her pride and joy. There was a bond between them that none of the rest of us shared. When I was growing up, it seemed all right that Denny was my father's favorite and Sam was my mother's favorite. That simply was the way it was, and I accepted it. My mother's gardens would be a part of Sam's aesthetic, the influence on Sam aesthetically. But I think also my mother's emotional state would have contributed. Her being terribly hurt by a word. My mother's headaches, having to be very sensitive to being quiet, to how could you do that? We weren't thinking about me. Made Sam more aware of a person who hurt. Does that make sense? My father would have been happiest being a Superior Court judge. He loved the law. If my father had a mistress, it was the law. And my mother felt left out. Rather than feeling happy for my father and wanting to be a part of his life, she resented it because it took time away from her. My father was happy with the law. I think it became difficult for him later on. He was tired, and he had, I don't know if I'd call it a heart attack, but he had a heart problem in 1952, and he was hospitalized. And then he was a judge at that time, and went back to work. I think it was easier for him to be a judge. There wasn't the strain, upkeep of an office, paying the secretaries and the help, and going back and forth to court. I don't remember my parents ever having a fight in front of Sam, and I don't know if Sam would have sided with my mother or my father. The one time that I heard of, my father was asked to run for Congress, and I was in bed and never invited in, but Sam and Denny were there, and my mother didn't want my father to run for Congress because her way of life would change. I don't know what Sam said, and I don't know what Denny said, but I know my father did not run for Congress. Sam's artistic streak came from my mother and also my father. And my father was very dramatic in the courtroom. To hear Dave Peckinpah talk about this poor boy who would never go home to his family if you convicted him, would never spend another Thanksgiving or Christmas with his beloved family if you convict him. I think Sam got some of his drama from my father. The character Judd, Steve Judd, is very much like my father in that he was an honest man. He knew what was right and what was wrong, and he portrayed it. You were also, I felt a great comfort with my father as I did with Steve Judd. He was a man you could rely on, and that's Sam and I relied on our father. And Coarsegold, it was a town we knew. It had been a stage stop years earlier. And this is all that Sam was familiar with. My father was righteous, and in the scene where Steve Judd is dying and Randolph Scott says, "I'll get the gold down," I always knew you would. Was very much my father. You know, Dida looked at the best in people rather than the worst. It was almost as if Steve Judd was writing the script saying, this is what you are going to do, not what you think you want to do, but you will do this because it's the right thing. I think of my father. He was very much that way. When my father died, the realization that our father was not here wasn't real. He couldn't be dead. 2, I think that Sam changed after that, and I don't think he would have behaved the way he did in later years had my father lived. My father wouldn't have put up with it, and my father was the one person that Sam would listen to and wouldn't argue. It would be Steve Judd saying,
"That was your second mistake tonight, and the last chance you'll ever get from me."
I know you didn't mean to. I expect this of you, and this is what you will do. And I don't think Sam would have behaved quite the way he did in later years if our father had been here. When Sam was doing his films, his TV shows, his early years were certainly evident. That's what he knew, that's what he was comfortable with, and that's what he could portray on the screen and in his writing of scripts. Sam liked to say he was part Indian. The Mono Indians were around Fresno and still are, and up in the mountains. It's not true. It was his nonsense that was saying this. He was not part Indian, although it would have been all right if he was. But I think some of it was Auntie Jane, and she was half Indian and half German. And but she was no relation, just through knowing her for a long, long time and loving her very much. My husband was very close to Sam, and they had a few good times down in Mexico, one of which I instigated, and we never told my husband about it until years later. But Sam and I had a good relationship until one night he was very abusive to our oldest daughter, and I told him he couldn't be that way, and I left with Walter and our girls. From then on, our relationship did change in that I wasn't available to Sam. I told him I wouldn't do some things, I would do others. I did go to the Golden Boot Award with Sam the year of 1984, and we had a wonderful time. As usual, Sam was late. I picked him up. We get to the Golden Boot Awards, and I had no idea how well known he was. And everyone, of course we were late, and we were sat right up at the table right next to the stage. And he was given the Golden Boot Award. He gave a beautiful speech. Sam did not look well at that time. I believe it was in July, and the following December he was gone. If Sam were to materialize today, I would be very happy to see him, and then I would think, I'm going to have to take care of him. I would have to see that he gets food and he eats well and he takes care of himself. But I would have fun. I'm not the same person I was 20 years ago, and I certainly couldn't change Sam, nor would I try. But I would love to see him again. It would be fun. Our home in Fresno is gone, and just recently I went back and visited the area. I recognized nothing. My older brother, Denver, and Sam came up with the idea of the broken bit. Before it was the broken bit, it was the bit of Bavaria. And they had to use the initials for whatever reason, and they finally came up with the broken bit. It is rather sad to drive by there because it's lonely, and I don't know, sometimes I think it would be nice if it just burned down and left the memories in smoke. I think it would be very nice if they honored Sam in Coarse Gold. I don't think most of them care. There are people certainly who love Sam's films, but the locals, he was just a local and not somebody special. And I think if Sam had been a famous attorney, if he had been a congressman, it would have been different. But of course, he was a director, and that was not not bronze statue quality. I think that I will not retire to North Fork. I think I'll stay here.